Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you following us at the eastern coast of the United States of America. Good morning here to the west coast of the U.S. and Canada as well. And good afternoon to those following us in other parts of the world, including friends who are following us in the archipelago of the Azores, the archipelago of Madeira, mainland Portugal, and some folks who have gotten a hold of me will be following us in Brazil as well. Welcome to Expanding Possibilities, Portuguese-Americans in California Public Service, and a bit about the Portuguese-American experience. It is the fourth coalition summit of the California Portuguese-American Coalition, an organization that was founded in 2016 to bring a little bit more awareness of our Portuguese-American experience and to also bring a little bit more of or quite a bit more participation of Portuguese-Americans in a public service throughout the state of California, according to our numbers, and we still have new numbers after last week's primary election, and of course we'll have new numbers for sure because folks are still in their offices until November after the November election, but according to our numbers we have around 140 Portuguese Americans who are in public service in California, from members of Congress, two of them, to of course state legislators, to many county supervisors, many in mayoral positions, many in also other forms such as city council, and the ever important school boards, community college boards, water boards, which to the East Coast doesn't make sense, but in California, it is certainly a big commodity, amongst other boards, from healthcare to the corporate world to health and security. And so welcome each and every one of you on behalf of CPAC, the California Portuguese-American Coalition. This program is sponsored by FLAD, the Luso-American Development Foundation, and it is also in collaboration, and all of our presentations will be archived at the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State, California State University, Fresno. PBBI is a product of three colleges: the College of Social Science, the College of Arts and Humanities, and the Jordan College of Agricultural Science and Technology. We have our first presenter. We have two presentations today, and we have two tomorrow. But first and foremost, we are welcoming each and every one of you, as we said, and also welcoming our Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco, Dr. Pedro Pinto, who has been in full force running since he arrived here a little over 6 months ago. Maybe now with the Dia de Portugal events over, he can take the summer to rest a little bit, but not much, because there are few events, obviously, in the Portuguese-American community, including our upcoming event that is coming forth actually a week from today in Sacramento, with the resolution of Dia de Portugal, that we are all very proud, and that the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco will, of course, be receiving that on behalf of the Portuguese-American community in California. Consul General, welcome, and if you can take a few minutes, it's always wonderful to hear from you, and welcome each and every one of our participants and those following us in various medias.
Bom dia, Dinis. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to participate in this fourth summit. I congratulate CPAC for all the great work that I know you do, and with important support of the Luso-American Foundation, as well as the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. I look forward to hear from Dulce Maria Scott, from Elmano Costa, and from other participants. It will be certainly a very enriching discussion. Here, talking about Portuguese-American participation in public service, I recall what you, Dinis, once recalled me also, that when the former Prime Minister António Guterres was visiting California, and I had the pleasure of working very closely with him, that he said, if you want to be good Portuguese, be good Americans and vote. And this message really encapsulates the essence of what we are discussing here today. Thank God we're in a democracy, and in the democracy, still the most important weapon is the vote. So this is what we have to stand for, our interests, and as diplomatic representative of Portugal in this wonderful entrepreneur community, the most important thing I can share with you today is to echo those words of António Guterres and get out the vote. A community can be interpreted as an abstract notion, but it's made of concrete individuals that do concrete acts through their voluntary efforts. And the members of the CPAC and the Portuguese-Americans that serve in public office are some of the most visible faces of the Portuguese community in California. And therefore, I commend the extra mile they go to stand for the interests of the Portuguese community. And in conclusion, I would like you to issue that you keep up with the good work, Godspeed. And I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in Sacramento in this initiative that, once again, Denise, you've been so important in promoting. Thank you very much, and all the best in this discussion.
Thank you, Consul General Pedro Pinto, and we also look forward to seeing you in Sacramento. It is an event, of course, of CPAC, but it is with co-sponsored with, of course, FLAD and the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco. We appreciate your presence. I want to, before introducing our keynote speaker, and thank again Dr. Pedro Pinto for his words, also add a little bit to what the Consul General just said in reference to what the Secretary General of the United Nations, then Prime Minister of Portugal, said, and we had a meeting prior to that, and one of the folks actually added something to it that I like to always add, which is it was told at one of the meetings. This was quite a few years ago, as many of you might recall, but it was said that we had to have a bigger presence in American public service, and we were, of course, referring to the state of California. And one of the Portuguese politicians that has passed on, John Vasconcelos, which was a classic in California from the San Jose area, who became one of the most powerful members of the California state legislature, said, being in public service is so important because decisions are made at the table. And if you're not sitting at the table, chances are you're going to be the menu. So it is an important part. It is very important to have a seat at the table so you don't become the menu. And that's what we have kind of used, referring to the importance of Portuguese-Americans in public service. So our keynote speaker is Dulce Maria Scott, professor of sociology and criminal justice at Anderson University. She holds a master's degree in political science and a PhD in sociology from the prestigious Brown University. She is chair of the Department of Social Work, Criminal Justice, and Family Science, and director of the Criminal Justice Program. Her research and her publications have focused on race, ethnicity, migrations, and diasporas. She has published extensively on the Portuguese-American diaspora. She is the co-executive editor of a book series, Interdisciplinary Diaspora Studies, with Peter Lang Publishing, and she is co-executive editor of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Portuguese Diaspora Studies, a fascinating journal. She is a research consultant and sits on the advisory board of the Portuguese-American Leadership Council of the United States, PALCUS, where she has done tremendous work, and I can tell you that PALCUS is very grateful. As a board member of PALCUS, very, very grateful to all the work that Dr. Dulce Scott has done. She is immediate past president of the Indiana Academy of Social Sciences, and we are very pleased to have her here. I'm going to put on the chat also the abstract that she kindly sent on this presentation so folks can follow along. And it is fascinating to have her work is certainly very important for the Portuguese-American community in the U.S. in general, but we're very fortunate that she tailored this presentation and worked tremendously hard for the state of California. Welcome, Dulce. Welcome, Dr. Scott. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise. Hello to everyone that's in the audience. Hello, Mr. Pedro Pinto. And I'm going to also thank you to the sponsors. I'm going to share my screen.
Perfect. Thank you.
My presentation is informed by two theoretical perspectives, assimilation and diaspora. There are many conceptualizations within both of these theoretical traditions, which I will not cover here. It is sufficient to say that the endpoint of assimilation is that the descendants of immigrants assimilate fully into American society, ceasing to have a sense of ethnicity and a special connection to the old country. As immigrants enter into educational institutions and jobs in the mainstream economy, they increasingly interact with people of the American mainstream and other ethnic groups, and this may lead to biological integration as people fall in love and marry across ethnicities. Diaspora, on the other hand, requires the maintenance of pluralism, that is, that distinct ethnic communities be maintained across the generations. Diaspora also requires a certain level of transnationalism, that is the maintenance of connections and involvement with the homeland, in our case, Portugal. People may see the two theoretical paradigms as incompatible. However, I see some compatibilities in as much a higher level of secondary structural assimilation provides the group with more resources that they may use in order to create and reconstruct their ethnic cultural practices, travel and invest in the homeland, as well as support learning of the ancestral language, culture, and history among the next generations, as well as afford to pay for them to go study in Portugal. I start with an overview of where Portuguese-Americans are situated in the United States. I use data from Census 2000 and the American Community Surveys of 2010, the 5-year survey of 2010, 2015, and 2020. Now, this is a lot of data, but I'm going to highlight the more salient points. Looking longitudinally at the table, we see that the Portuguese-American population increased quite a bit from 2000 to 2010, and then it began to decline by 2015 and continues to decline. Second, we see that California has been the state with the highest number of Portuguese-Americans, followed by Massachusetts. Then we see that the states of traditional immigrant settlement, California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, they have all been experiencing declines in their share of the Portuguese-American population. On the other hand, Florida has been experiencing quite a bit of growth. It went from almost 49,000 to over 89,000 in 20 years. Texas has been growing quite a bit, and states like Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Virginia, Nevada, etc., have been increasing, but not as much as Texas. I want to move on to Portuguese-Americans by county and then city in California. I made this map and where I highlighted 20 California counties with 5,000 or more Portuguese-Americans. Looking at the darkest colors, Alameda has over 24,000 Portuguese-Americans, Sacramento over 22,000, and then Los Angeles and Stanislaus, San Diego, and so forth, and Contra Costa, San Joaquin as well. And then moving on to the cities, on the left here, I put 14 cities that have 3,000 Portuguese-Americans or more. And as you can see, San Jose is the largest. I included San Leandro, although it's below 3,000, but this is within the margin of error. When you collect data using samples, there's always a margin of error. On the right, you see a map that of the cities that have 1,000 or more people. This is San Jose, Sacramento, Fresno, Tulare, Los Angeles, San Diego. So you see about 3 clusters here, the Los Angeles, San Diego corridor, Tulare and Fresno, and then this huge population here. However, I also did a map, a 3D map of cities and places with more than 100 Portuguese-Americans, and you can see that it becomes a lot of very much populated with sprinkled all over the place. And so if you look back here, this is all empty, but when you come here, this is populated. I want to move on to the place of birth of Portuguese Americans and citizenship rates. And we see that almost 82% of all Americans were born in the United States. We are an old established immigrant group. 18.2% are immigrants, but only 11.8 were born in Portugal. As such, 6.4 of them were born in other areas of the Portuguese diaspora. And those areas are other European countries, Asian countries, African countries, Central and South America, and Canada. The rates of citizenship, which are higher for those born in Portugal than are for all the more recent immigrants, which I believe are to a higher percentage from the areas of the other areas of the Portuguese diaspora. So this leads me to believe that those born in Portugal are mostly the post-1958 immigration wave, and that more recently there's more people coming from other areas of the diaspora, and they have not had time to have get their citizenship. Then continuing with this topic and comparing across states. Well, first of all, Portuguese Americans have higher percentages of foreign born than does the entire United States, except for California. Among the 5 states, California has the lowest percentage of foreign born. This is in part because the post-1958 immigration wave ended earlier in California than did in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. However, when it comes to citizenship rates, California and Florida have lower percentages of people with citizenship, and Rhode Island has the highest. Of course, this is puzzling. However, if one looks at the data for the time of entry, California has a lower percentage of people who entered before 2000 and a higher percentage of people who entered after 2010. The new immigrants then that have not yet time to get their citizenship. Very few people are going into Rhode Island, as you can see, and a lot of people are going into Florida. Overall, when it comes to citizenship, Portuguese Americans are well integrated, showing higher rates of naturalization than those of the entire US population. And then I'm going to Portuguese Americans by place of birth and citizenship in selected California counties. I did counties that had 4,000 or more Portuguese Americans either in 2015 or 2020. And for this geographical area, I had to use data from 2015. The 2020 data won't be available until April of 2023. I highlighted in blue the ones that have the highest foreign-born populations, and you can see what they are: Los Angeles, Merced, San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara, and then in orange, the ones that have the lowest rates of foreign population, of foreign-born Portuguese Americans. And this county Butte, this county has been losing Portuguese American population recently. And then you see El Dorado, Placer, Sacramento, and San Luis Obispo has having very low rates of people that are foreign born. I looked at the citizenship rates and they correlate pretty much with those who have more foreign born having lower citizenship rates. So I didn't put those rates here not to, so that I could even crowd the table. So what we're going to see will be going on in California is more a rural-urban divide as opposed to foreign-born and American-born. I want to move now to education, income, and occupation. And the latest data available for these indicators is from 2019. So in 2019, just over 33% of all Americans had a bachelor's degree or higher. And then for all people in California, it was 35%. And for all Portuguese Americans, it was 31.6%. Portuguese Americans have been catching up. In 2000, for example, the distance between Portuguese Americans and all Americans was much higher than it is now. One scholar affirms that this is the normal path that it takes people from working class immigrants 3 to 4 generations to catch up in terms of education. Looking at the 5 states, California is below the average for the United States, all of California and all Portuguese Americans. And I'm just looking at the percentage with bachelor's degrees or higher. Of the remaining states, Rhode Island has the lowest, then Massachusetts, and then New Jersey, and then Florida. I also wanted to mention that in the new states that the Portuguese Americans have been moving to, the level of education is quite high, higher than the average for the entire United States. And then in counties in California, again, in blue, we have the highest levels of college education and beyond college, and in orange, the lowest levels. And so let's look at San Francisco. In San Francisco, 62.3% of all Portuguese Americans that live there have a university education. That's huge. That's really, really big. And then that's followed by Orange County, and then Los Angeles, and then San Diego and San Mateo. Conversely, you can see the ones that they have the lowest levels, and Merced has 11.7% of the population with a university education, and also Kings, Stanislaus, Solano, San Bernardino, and Tulare. We have here an urban-rural divide. San Francisco, the Silicon Valley, and the Los Angeles-San Diego corridor versus the Central Valley and the agrarian counties. So it is because of this divide that university education rates are lower in California. There are highly educated Portuguese Americans in California, but there are also many who have very low levels of education. I want to move on now to levels of income. And you can see the rates here for the mean household income, and that's the only one I'm going to pay attention to. For the United States, California, all Portuguese Americans. Portuguese Americans in California make more money than the United States, all of California, and all Portuguese Americans. Rhode Island as the lowest, followed by Florida, and then New Jersey as the highest. And then while I was digging through Census Bureau data, I came across this interesting piece of information regarding all the income made by Portuguese Americans. This is all the income of everybody all over the United States. Now, this does not include wealth. It includes salaries, wages, dividends, rents, etc. It does not include capital, savings, property, business. And then I'm assuming that if people are paid under the table, they may not be included here as well. So you can see that Portuguese Americans, all Portuguese Americans make over $43 billion. This is the highest percentage of these is made by people in California, followed by people in Massachusetts. So there is a close correlation with the population levels in each state and the amount that each state makes, but it's not complete, because if you look at Rhode Island and New Jersey, you see that although Rhode Island has more people, they make less income than the people in New Jersey. And then I looked at the counties, and again, highest in blue to reach the sky, and or in orange, the lowest. And again, San Francisco, and let's look at the median family income. San Francisco has, people make on average $132,917. And then that's followed by El Dorado. I'm assuming this is because people live there and work in Sacramento. And then Orange County, and then San Mateo and Santa Clara. And then you can see the rates for the lower ones. We have Butte, Merced, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Stanislaus. Now I want to look at the occupational areas. And if you look at the last two columns, these are the occupations that have been associated with immigrant groups that come with low levels of education and occupational skills. They find jobs in the manual and blue collar areas of the economy. And as the theory goes, as the group becomes more integrated, gets more education, then you should have a higher percentage of people in the management, business, science, and arts occupations. And these are middle to upper middle class occupations. For example, a doctor, you'd be in this occupational area, but an assistant to that doctor, you'd be in the service occupations. In this sector, we see that Portuguese-Americans in California are ahead of the entire US, all of California, all Portuguese-Americans, and then they followed by Florida, and then Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. And then I looked at the occupations by county in California, and let's go to the second slide first, where I have San Francisco. We see that in San Francisco, more than 60% of all Portuguese-Americans are in this white-collar, stable sector, high-paying sector of the economy. And then we have very few in the traditional manual labor sectors of the economy. And then let's move on to, then it's Orange, and then Los Angeles, and then Sacramento, and then San Diego, and San Mateo. And then looking at the ones with the lowest levels, you can see that they then have higher percentage in the natural resources and production transportation in the blue collar manual labor sectors of the economy. You look at Merced, I'm assuming that this is agriculture, that there's a lot of people involved in agriculture. And then here, Kings as well. And then in the next page, we see in San Joaquin also a lot of natural resources, agriculture, and so forth. And again, this is the same urban-rural divide that we saw with both education and income. Now I want to spend a little bit of time on biological integration or amalgamation. Now, in the entire US, 65 million people have unspecified ancestry. That means they probably don't know with all the mixtures that have occurred. But among those who do say identify with a specific ancestry or ancestries, 68% of them say that they have a single ancestry. Among Portuguese-Americans, this is only 40.9%. The Portuguese have a reputation historically for mixing with other populations. We have been doing so in the United States. When you look at the data here, you see that only Massachusetts and New Jersey have rates above 50% of single ancestry. The lowest state is Hawaii, which is understandable because immigration ended there long ago. And then California has the lowest among the traditional states of immigrant settlement. But in the states to where the Portuguese have been moving, like Texas and Washington, the overwhelming majority has multiple ancestries. And then I looked at some cities in California, and only Tulare and Hanford have 50% or higher that say that they have a single Portuguese ancestry. Now, Tulare has similar rates to the cities in Massachusetts, and then you have the cities in Rhode Island that are a little lower, and the highest percentages of single ancestry are in New Jersey. In Newark, it's 90%, which is amazing given the other numbers for the other places. And then I have ancestries in selected counties in California. And again, the ones that have the highest percentage of Portuguese people saying that they have a single ancestry are highlighted in blue, and the ones that have the lowest percentage are highlighted in orange. And so Alameda, Kings, Merced, Stanislaus, and Tulare, they all have above 50% who say that they have single ancestry. But when it comes to San Francisco, Contra Costa, El Dorado, Los Angeles, the overwhelming majority of people have more than one ancestry. I made a chart here that the 5 counties that scored the highest across these indicators, the lowest when it comes to ancestry. And you can see that there's some overlap. So San Francisco appears in all 4 of them. But it's not a perfect overlap. And I mapped these, and you can see that they are coastal, and then Sacramento being the capital, and El Dorado because of the proximity to Sacramento. And Contra Costa and Sonoma are here only because of their high rates of biological integration. They scored high in the other indicators, but not as high in the top 5. And now I want to move on to the ones that had the lowest level of integration. And you can see there's also some overlap. And you see Merced in all of them. Merced scored low in just about all of them. And then you map them, and you can see they are in the Central Valley, except for Sacramento. And then, Alameda. So you can see the geographical location is almost opposite to the geographical location of those that are doing the highest. I want to now spend a little bit of time on acculturation. There are other aspects to acculturation than competency in our case in English, but this is the only indicator that the census provides to measure acculturation. So when it comes to the use and ability in English, Portuguese-Americans in general are not too far from the numbers for the American population at large. The lowest levels of linguistic assimilation are among those who were born in Portugal. 17.6% speak English only at home, and 41.8% speak English less than very well. And then looking at the states, California has the highest level of linguistic assimilation. 82.6% speak English only at home, and only 4% speak English less than very well. And then because it was only 4%, I decided not to analyze across the counties. Portuguese-Americans in California are highly integrated. There is a pronounced urban-rural divide in terms of performance along the indicators of secondary structural assimilation as well as biological integration. And I want to move on to the concept of diaspora. As I said before, there is some tension between the concept of diaspora and the concept of assimilation. While assimilation sees ethnic communities ultimately as fizzling out and melting into the American mainstream, and this takes 3 to 4 generations, diaspora at a minimum requires the maintenance of a distinct ethnic community across the generations. And for some scholars, you can only say that an ethnic group has become a full diaspora after the ethnic community has survived for 3 generations beyond the immigrant generation. Diaspora also requires interactions and involvement in the homeland that last across the generations. Now, the Census Bureau has no data that allows us to see what's going on generation after generation. And for that, we have to do our own surveys. But this is a very important part of the concept of diaspora, and we need this data. As such, I'm using data from the PALCUS National Index Survey. I extracted the people from California into a separate database. There were 553 that responded from California. And this is a small sample, and beyond that, the sample is not representative of the entire population. It has an overrepresentation of the immigrant generation and of people with higher levels of education and income. However, until we get a more representative sample, that is, until we are able to afford to do a more representative sample, it is the only data that we have that allows us to see what is going on across the generations. We asked people if they were part of a Portuguese community. Almost 87% said that they were. And some of those that said no, they explained that this had not been a personal choice, but rather that they had to move because of work or other reasons, and that there were no Portuguese people where they lived now. There was no relation between these and the generations. The descendants of immigrants are just as likely to live within ethnic communities as their parents were. And this bodes well for diaspora, obviously. So moving on, we asked people about what their biggest challenges were in their Portuguese communities. And I want to bring your attention to what I call diasporic concerns. There's 4 of them here, and those are maintaining the Portuguese language, getting more people involved in community organizations, maintaining the Portuguese culture, and maintaining ties to Portugal. Maintaining the Portuguese language is a diasporic concern because it is important for the maintenance of the cultural identity as well as connections to Portugal. For example, I watch news from Portugal quite a bit on RTP, on the internet, but if I did not speak Portuguese, I would not be able to do that. Also, the country of origin is where the diaspora grounds their identity. So we need to have the connections to the country of origin to ground ourselves as Portuguese-Americans. Getting people involved in community organizations is extremely important for diaspora. In the survey, several people commented on how difficult it was to get the younger generations involved in community organizations. Now, who maintains the ethnic culture? It's the community organizations. Who puts on the festivals, raises funds for museums, libraries, monuments, the teaching of Portuguese? The community organizations do that. If we do not have community organizations, we will not become a diaspora long term. We may be a diaspora now, but not long term. Now maintaining ties to Portugal is more of an individual pursuit. People may make decisions to travel there or not, to invest there. But ethnic organizations can also contribute to raising funds for the younger generation to have opportunities to go study in Portugal. So it's a good thing that people have diasporic concerns, but it's not such a good thing that people feel that those are threatened, that the maintenance of the Portuguese language is threatened, and that getting the organizations going across the generations is threatened as well. Now let us move to transnationalism and relations with the homeland, with Portugal in this case. And remember, the sample is not representative, so these numbers or these percentages are probably higher than they would be for the entire Portuguese-American population. But that 82% visit Portugal, that's a good prospect for diaspora formation. Now moving on to here, we have on the right, people who say that they've been 7 to 10 more times. And I guess that's the turismo da saudade. And then 17.8% have never visited Portugal. But what happens across the generations? Those that visit very frequently, this shrinks quite a bit. And by the way, the first generation are immigrants who are 14 years of age or older. The 1.5 are immigrants between 14 and 3. The second generation are the firstborn in the United States and those that arrived under 3, and then the grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Most people have just mixtures of generations on different sides of their family. But when it comes to never, you can also see that that increases as the generations pass. And then I want to move on to property ownership in Portugal. And as you can see, there's also a decline in that. I imagine that this 1.5 and second generations have inherited property from their parents. 117 people say that they own property in Portugal. This is a good thing, but again, there was a high representation of people from the first generation in the sample. And then 13 people indicated that they own a business in Portugal. Now, let's talk about Portuguese skills. And I'm not going to say a lot about these graphs, but I just want to say that when it comes to being able to function professionally in Portuguese, you have to be extremely fluent, both in writing and in speaking. And you see how the rates of the number of people, or the percentage of people there are extremely fluent in writing is very low. People said that the main way in which they learned Portuguese was from their parents and grandparents at home. And so that's why they don't write, even though they may speak some. Now, what happens across the generations? What happens is linguistic mortality. This happens with all immigrant groups, not just the Portuguese. But you can see when it comes to don't speak at all, that really increases beyond the second generation. And then extremely fluent in Portuguese, that really declines by the fourth generation. No one speaks extremely fluently. And again, to function well in Portuguese, it has to be extremely fluent. With the writing, it's even worse, but I'm not going to stop there for too long. And then I went into citizenship. And to be transnational, you should really be a dual citizen. Some Portuguese-Americans are actually triple citizens because they came from a country where there is a Portuguese diaspora and they have citizenship there, citizenship in the United States and citizenship in Portugal. So citizens of Portugal only are present only in the first and 1.5 generation. And dual citizenship is, well, there's someone of the grandchildren, maybe one person that has it. But this could be improved. Portugal has extended citizenship to the grandchildren of Portuguese citizens, but people cite all sorts of difficulties, and I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm not going to say what difficulties they cite. Anyway, participation in Portuguese elections, only 4.7% have voted in every election, and that's probably higher than it is for the rest of the population. Some respondents explained that they had never voted because it's too hard to do. They did not live anywhere near Portuguese consulate. And someone even suggested that the Portuguese embassy should mail ballots to everyone on their lists that is Portuguese. Okay, so that's, I want to go into my conclusions. Portuguese-Americans in California are highly integrated into American society. Educationally, they are ahead of some of the other states of traditional Portuguese settlement, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, but not New Jersey. They continue to be slightly below the overall rates of education for the entire American population. They show high levels of income, considerably higher than the medians and means shown for the entire American population, and higher than those of Portuguese Americans in the states of traditional Portuguese settlement, except for New Jersey. In terms of occupation, California has the highest percentage of Portuguese Americans in middle to upper middle class occupations as compared to the traditional states of Portuguese settlement, all Portuguese Americans and all Americans. Biologically, Portuguese Americans are integrating rapidly. Nationally, only 40.9% indicate that they have a single ancestry, In California, only 38.1% specify that they are of single ancestry. The level of integration of Portuguese Americans in California, along with various dimensions of assimilation, vary by county, with those located in San Francisco and the Silicon Valley counties, as well as the Los Angeles, Orange, San Diego corridor, displaying the highest levels of integration, and the more rural and Central Valley counties showing the lowest level of integration. Portuguese Americans in California continue to maintain an identification with their ethnic communities, and they prioritize community concerns that are diaspora related, such as the maintenance of the Portuguese language and of ethnic organizations. They can continue to maintain connections to Portugal, but these connections, travel and property ownership, decline sharply by generation in the US, and so does competency in the Portuguese language. The level of dual citizenship among American-born generations could be higher, and so could participation in Portuguese elections. Portuguese-American culture is alive and well in the United States. One has only to look at the colorful and lively Day of the Azores and Day of Portugal celebrations of the recent days, not to mention all the big festas and celebrations that take place in areas of Portuguese concentration. However, as immigration has dwindled and those of the post-1958 immigration wave continue to pass away, will Portuguese Americans resist the powerful forces of assimilation? That is, will they continue to maintain distinct communities with a rich ethnic culture in the US? And will they establish themselves as a mature diaspora with a solid Portuguese identity and connections to the old country in assimilation language, homeland, in diaspora language? They will be able to do so if the first generations are successful in passing the mantle to their children and grandchildren. If not, they will become diluted in the vastness of the North American mainstream, possessing only distant and nearly forgotten ancestral memories. And that's my presentation.
Well, and that's a fascinating presentation, and I have about 150 questions, but we have only a little bit of time. I don't know if any of those in the audience here, there were just some very nice comments. I'm trying to follow social media as well, some very nice comments, but no questions there. I do have one particular. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Dulce, Scott. It was magnificent, and a lot of territory in such a short amount of time.
I know, but people can look at the tables.
Correct, and analyze it. And there's one that's fascinating, which really the last part of your conclusions, and I wanted to look at that and get your opinion on this, and from the data that you looked at and the data that you've been looking at for years, for PALCUS, and in your professional life there at the university as well for other groups. As you said, there showed a bigger integration, and so whatever that word, of course, has lots of different meanings in some of the areas like the urban areas, which makes all the sense in the world, of course.
So the Silicon Valley and
San Diego, Los Angeles basin, etc. But yet, when it comes to integration, as far as and the numbers that we have, not the numbers, yes, numbers, but when it comes to people in Portuguese public office, or Portuguese-Americans, I should say, Americans of Portuguese ancestry, as you showed there, they're no longer kind of Portuguese-Americans. They're basically Americans with Portuguese ancestry, as you showed, and mainly from the islands of the Azores. As you know, it's like a very strong percentage. Everybody talks about 90%. Who knows? What it is, but it's a very large percentage in California. From the Azores. Yet if we look at the areas, those same areas where we have integration, we have very few.
Let me rephrase this. We have integration in all of them. It's just that we have more integration.
Correct. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. You'd show that. It's interesting that there is, and I don't know what, there's been theories about this. Of the 140 that we have in public office, Portuguese-Americans, let's call them that, or Americans of Portuguese ancestry in California, the vast majority are in the rural counties. San Diego, for example, does not have anyone in public office. Los Angeles basin has, I believe, 2 people in public office, if my memory serves me correct. And so what do you what do you attribute that? Is it because it's smaller populations and then people can have a little bit bigger voice? You know, the big fish in a small pond kind of concept.
Yes. So, you know, one time I interviewed a politician in Rhode Island, and he was running statewide, and he said that Portuguese Americans statewide only contributed 4% of votes, but that was enough to get him over the top, right? So in areas where you have more Portuguese Americans concentrated and smaller towns, that percentage is even higher. And so it becomes enough to get people over the top. Now, in San Francisco, we have less than 5,000 Portuguese people. And in a city of millions, you know, what is that, right? So I think that's part of the explanation.
Yeah. Do you think that it might be also occupation? Because you showed that, because it was interesting that how you showed, you know, occupation versus income, and in many areas of California, the occupations, as far as because of the lower levels of education. I mean, lower levels. I mean, it's always it's growing immensely, but it's not the percentage that we'd like to have. You know, with professional degrees, with bachelor's degrees and beyond and above that. However, the income-wise, it's higher than many other states. And a lot of it goes because of the entrepreneurship and because of the agricultural relations. So there's a little bit, there's the
disconnect, right, between the education and the income. Yeah. And that's among all Portuguese Americans everywhere in the United States. We are making more money than we should for the level of education that we have. And I do attribute that to businesses, and I mean, the farming Portuguese Americans have been very wealthy in California in that area. So that's what I attribute it to, that you, in some jobs, you don't need to have a college degree.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And it's, and some of it has been involved with, especially their families coming over, even the volcano, a couple of years where people bought property, and of course, you know, property went through the roof, you know, that kind of stuff. And so it is really fascinating. I mean, we could spend another hour analyzing each one of the graphics. Lots of information. I thank you very much. I don't know if anybody else has any questions to put on there. Thank you to the nice comment from Professor Irene Blager.
Let me just say that as you guys go on with exploring the possibilities, it is important to know where we are, how many of us there are, and how we're doing socioeconomically. And I hope the presentation helped in that way. It
did immensely. I think that I think what you gave us is kind of a lot of food for thought, and a lot of food for thought in the aspect that, you know, we can now look at these numbers and see, you know, where, you know, there's room to grow. Obviously, there's room to grow in people in everything, but there's obviously room to grow for people who want to vote in Portugal, because it's only 4%.
Elmano is going to talk about the Citizenship project.
Correct.
We can look at where there are a lower level of citizens or higher foreign-born population to then work with those populations.
Indeed, yeah, and that's and that's the other, you know. But you gave us a lot of information that we appreciate it, and I think that's, you know, I actually in an in-person event, I'd like to, you know, share a couple of those slides, because I think there's a lot of food for thought there, and a lot of ways that we can look and say, well, this is where we're at. And now, you know, what do we have to do as a community to get from point A to point B? And a lot of times we've been doing this, as you know, Dr. Dulce, without data. It's just, you know, oh, well, everybody says it's this way. You know, it's like people say, you know, I have a friend of mine who the other day told me, everybody in Turlock is Portuguese. Well, everybody that knows Elmano, probably, not even that, because he is an education professor, and he's taught many people who weren't Portuguese. But it's just not everybody in Turlock is Portuguese, or everybody in Tulare is from Terceira. And this data gives us that, you know, that basis to go.
Yeah, well, I thank you again for inviting me, and I'm going to leave and join Elmano's presentation as part of the audience.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Again, that was Dr. Dulce Maria Scott. We appreciate her presentation. We have a lot of food for thought, and we hopefully can even take that presentation and, you know, look at and do a series of workshops, whether it be online or in person at different places about that. And we're going to continue with our Portuguese with our summit. We have our next speaker already. You can see him already on there. And I'm just going to do a very brief intro because it would take too long to read his entire resume. But most of you in the Portuguese American community following us here and online, and thanks to all the people that are following online, and thanks to there's 32 Facebook groups that have agreed to carry it. And so we appreciate that, because it's a way, all of them in California, it's a way to reach these different groups that we're trying to do with this project of the California Portuguese-American Coalition. So Dr. Elmano Costa is widely known in the Portuguese-American community. He had his Bachelor's of Arts with a major in history and minors in mathematics and Spanish from California State University, Stanislaus. Then he has his Master of Arts in Education, Administration, and Supervision from California State University, also at Stanislaus, graduated with distinction, and with his thesis, very important towards our Portuguese-American experience, which was attitudes of Portuguese-American parents toward education. I would think that that probably has changed in the last 30 some years since he's done his master's, and that showed in Dulce's presentation. And he has a doctorate in education with a major in school administration and a minor in curriculum and instruction from the University of the Pacific. His dissertation is the relationship of placement in Spanish and English bilingual classrooms to the achievement of native English speakers, also a fascinating study. He's published in various journals and publications. He has given numerous talks in the education field throughout the state of California and beyond, and in the Portuguese-American community here, mainland Portugal, the Azores, the Portuguese communities in both the United States and Canada. He is also the director of the Portuguese Studies Center at the California State University in Stanislaus, and he's kind of professor emeritus, although he's still teaching, I believe, a couple of courses. And he is, of course, the vice president, Jean Pedroso, but he's also the treasurer at the California Portuguese-American Coalition, one of the original founding directors. Elmano, welcome, and we're very excited to have you. And as Dulce said, it's a perfect segue to talk about the Citizenship project, which was a national project, not just a California project, that you led. You were on the board, and you also were president for quite a few years. So welcome. Tell us a little bit about the project, if you don't mind, and then your presentation, because we need to have data. And I know that for the years that I believe the Citizenship project is kind of over this phase anyway, but for all of those years, I think that is one of the reasons why we vote in higher percentage than many other folks do, because of the work of the project. So welcome.
Thank you, Denise. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Can I ask you a favor, though? I tried to share my screen, and it's telling me I cannot.
Well, we're going to change that right now.
So if you could enable that, I think.
Sure. Let's change that right now. And tell us a little bit the project. First of all, how long was it in effect for?
The project started in 1999. In fact, it's one of the slides that I have to share.
All right.
And it ended in 2016. So am I able to get on there now?
You are.
Okay, here we go. Okay. So basically, what I'm Denise asked me to share, even though I was president of the board of directors of the project for many years. In the reality, I think credit must go to James McGlinchey, who you listen to the name and you think, what does this man have to do with Portuguese and voting? He is, I think, as Dulce said, he's one of those that is biologically a product of integration. His father obviously was not Portuguese, but on his mother's side, he is Portuguese, as he proudly says, from Rabo de Peixe in São Miguel, and from Faial is the two sides that he has. His grandfather actually went to Faial to work on the lighthouse that then became famous in the Vulcão dos Capelinhos when he became submerged in ash, and there married a woman from Madeira, and he is from Madeira, from Faial, and so he is the product. Anyway, Jim was a diplomat, and one of his last assignments was in Lisbon, and there he got to know the Portuguese, the Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, FLAD Foundation. And as he was looking toward retirement, one of his passions was, in fact, the Portuguese community and how they were perceived. And his experience was in Massachusetts. That's where his roots were. And he always felt that they were not perceived well, to be kind, and that he needed to do something, and this was going to be his contribution to the community. And so FLAD was willing to fund the project. And so for several years, it was FLAD that funded it, then later joined by the Azorian government through the Direção Regional das Comunidades, and they became equal partners for several years as well until Jim retired. And then we had a couple of people who came in, including Tony Borba, who led it for a couple of years, I think 3 years actually. And at that point, then the project ended. And I think one of the things to remember, and then is that, and I believe this is kind of I'm not quoting anyone because it's me who put it here, but I think that arguably to be ignored in a political sense is almost worse than to be maltreated, because at least if you're maltreated, they know you're there. If you're ignored, it's like they don't even know you exist. And I think for a long time, that was the perception of elected officials of the Portuguese community. It's like, who? Portuguese? Where? What do you mean, kind of thing. And so the project set out to kind of change this mindset, to make sure that elected officials knew that there was a Portuguese community, a significant Portuguese community, in fact, in 5 states of the United States, which were the states that we worked with. And of course, the other thing is, we know from a political standpoint that if people do not vote, then they might as well not exist. That's why they're ignored, because they are not. And the perception was that Portuguese people, in fact, didn't. So the design of the project evolved a lot in the first couple of years, and then it kind of settled into a routine for the rest of its years, because in the early years, Jim wasn't really all that certain what he could do. And so he did a lot of community outreach, and basically he was looking for, where can I reach a significant number of Portuguese-American voters, and then be able to work with those communities and do something about it. And you'll see that there's a lot of churches involved here, because that became an easy way to reach several thousand Portuguese-American voters. But there were also a lot of civic clubs, and you'll see the last one there in New Bedford, the Immigrants Assistance Center. Through the different organizations, it was possible to get their membership rosters, and then to be able to match those against voter registration rosters, and to be able to see who is registered, who is not. And something that many people do not realize is whether you vote or not is public information. Everybody thinks, oh, it's confidential. It's confidential who you vote for. So I don't know if you voted for Trump or Biden in the last election, but I can get from each county a voter registration list that tells me whether you voted in the last election or not. And so by being able to do that, we were then able to identify who was voting, who was not, what percentage of people were voting, and get some very interesting results. So you get some more of the places that we worked with in Rhode Island and New Jersey, and eventually there were some in Connecticut as well, and obviously in California. And you can see one of the largest organizations we worked with in California was PFSA, or the Portuguese Fraternal Society of America, because they're the largest, because they were statewide. And we were able to reach out across all the different centers of population where they had members, and be able to work with them. But we continue to obviously work with churches as well. And so we were able to. Now, what I'm giving you today is just a snapshot, if you will, a really a précis, if you will, of what is contained in the book. I have the book here and I have the photo there, but the final report of the Portuguese-American Citizenship Project. So if you really want to go neck deep into this, you can get the book. And therefore, I believe it's actually Amazon carries the book, but if not, you can get a hold of me and I'll share my contact information at the end, and we'll make sure that you're able to acquire one of these books. So that has all the nitty-gritty detail, everything that was done. But I want to focus a little bit on what was learned from these years of the Portuguese-American Citizenship Project. And I want to really kind of take it in the direction of looking at myths and then talking about the reality, because we started out with several things that people took as truths that the data did not support at all. In fact, the data showed a completely different picture. And so let's look into some of those myths. And there's 4 of them that I'm going to share with you. The first myth, when we started talking to people in different communities, was that, well,
Elmano, can you make the slide bigger? Just on slideshow, go to present if you don't mind, please. Thank you.
Okay.
That way people will be able to see the
full screen.
Like, yeah, from the beginning. Yeah. From the beginning. Not from the beginning, from current slide. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. So thank you for that feedback. So the first myth was people were not citizens. They were immigrants. So therefore, why are we running even a campaign to get them to vote when they can't even register to vote? And we found that that is not true, that in fact, most Portuguese are now citizens. Not all of them. I mean, there is still, depending on the organization, depending on whether they attract more first generation immigrants or not, depending on the age distribution. But we found that there were significant numbers, and these are this is Santo Cristo Church in Fall River, Massachusetts, where, if you go there, you think you're in San Miguel, because everyone, seems to be from San Miguel. But yet there we had over 60%, almost 60% of the people who were citizens, and in and 45% who were already registered, although there was 14% who were citizens and not registered. Another example, St. Elizabeth, I believe this was in Rhode Island, and here you find again over 60%, almost 70%, who were already citizens, and the majority, 58%, were already registered to vote. And I could keep showing you slides from different organizations, but in reality, it was a myth that people were not citizens, and therefore you could not run a civic participation campaign. You also have here from California, this is Our Lady of the Assumption Church in Turlock. And you find that, we have, in fact, still a bit of a registration problem. And Our Lady of the Assumption is probably the most Portuguese church in the Turlock area. You can see that there were 42%. Sacred Heart is another church here in Turlock. I mean, they're just a few miles apart. And again, there were 42% that were registered to vote, where statewide in California, the average at that time was 63%. Actually, now I think the California average is much higher, since California switched to the voter, basically the driver automatically voter registration when you get a driver's license. And so a lot more people are registered. So another myth then was that people do not vote. And I saw that Dulce, was talking about that issue as well. And in fact, it is a myth, and this is where I'm going to spend quite a bit more time now talking about, is what did we find as a result of our work. And in fact, one of the goals that we had was to be able to actually present numbers. And I think Denise said it so well. people deal in a lot of things that they say, oh, it's this, it's that. But if you don't have concrete numbers, if you don't have data to back it up, it is strictly an opinion. I mean, it's a lot of times listening to what passes as quote unquote news programs on TV nowadays, where people blabber about all sorts of things and they can't back anything up with any hard evidence. I happen to be a math minor. I love math. And I like numbers. I think numbers is how we verify whether what we're saying is truth or not. So here is Our Lady of the Assumption Church in Turlock. Here is the comparison of voter turnout in several elections between 98 and 2004. And what you see, the bar on the right is, and I'm somewhat colorblind, so pardon me if I say the color name and it's the wrong color. My wife is always correcting me, but the darker, what might call the gray, is the county voter turnout. The green is the Our Lady of the Assumption Church voter turnout. And what do you see consistently almost every single election except March of 2000? People at Our Lady of the Assumption voted in a higher percentage than the people in Stanislaus County. And what you see is, in some cases, some very high, but if you take an average of what's going on here, you've got like a 60% consistent turnout, although in March of 2000, you've got like a 90%. So that must have been a heated presidential election. I can't remember what it was, but usually that's where you get the higher turnouts as presidential elections, lower turnouts in the off years, as we just saw, a abysmal turnout in the primary that we just had in California. But anyway, so dispelling the myth, Portuguese, once they're registered, they vote, and they vote in higher percentages than other people in general. Another church here in Turlock, the same thing compared to Stanislaus County. And again, you see the same thing. In fact, in this case of Sacred Heart, and Sacred Heart is a very mixed church. It has a large Portuguese community. Historically, it was a very Portuguese church. Now it's more of a Latino church, a Hispanic church, than it is a Portuguese church, but it continues to have services in Portuguese. And it's a much bigger church than Our Lady of the Assumption. There are some 4,000 families at Sacred Heart. But again, what do you consistently see? When people are registered to vote, they turn out in higher numbers than the general population. And again, a very respectable, even though a little bit lower than Our Lady of the Assumption, but if you average out all of those, you've got at least a 50% turnout. And again, the 2000 was the one that broke all records, where just about everyone who could vote went out and voted. So here is one of the, I think the graphs or the charts that I really like, because it kind of shows what happened when we got involved with a community and made voting an issue, made it where everyone became aware that that organization, that church, was really emphasizing voter turnout, was making an effort. And what you see here on the left are two, and this is St. Elizabeth's Parish. Again, I can't remember if this is the one in New Jersey or the one in Rhode Island, but I think it's the one in Rhode Island, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, you can see before we got involved, they were pretty much voting at the same rate as the county. They were, basically in March 2000, 0.6% below the average for the county. In September, they were 0.3. I mean, those are really insignificant differences. But what you see after there was a real concerted effort to get a voter turnout, they started to exceed the county turnout by 4% again. So you can bump those numbers up even more, even though as a whole, we found that they were already voting and voting in high numbers. You could have an effect of increasing the turnout when you made it a real effort to get people out. Here is another example of comparison. This one is kind of an agglomeration of several different organizations. And this one is also kind of an interesting one because of this one right here. So one of the things, and I'll show you in a minute, one of the things that the Citizenship Project was doing with organizations is that it was a multitude of efforts, but one of them that really was the most noticeable one, if you will, was that these organizations would mail out to all of their members a voter reminder card that would go out a couple of weeks before the election, saying basically, you know, we're really focusing on getting our members to vote. We want you to make every effort to go out and vote. Here's the election day. And in some places, we actually would state where the precinct was that they would vote, so that there was no question where they were supposed to go if they had never voted before. Now, what this is interesting is next to last one here, September of 2004. This organization had been consistently making those efforts, sending out those cards. And then with a fluke in September 2004, there was a change of leadership and the information was all there, ready to go, but the cards were never mailed. And what you see here in September 2004 is that that organization actually had a lower voter turnout than the average for their county. Whereas in the other elections where the cards went out, they were always exceeding by very significant numbers the county turnout. Now, when they went below, it was a very small difference. I mean, less than like 1% below the county average, but it still showed that those little cards made a difference to people when we sent them out. All right, oops, sometimes these things want to jump too much. Okay, one of the other things that was real interesting, and I suspect that Dulce was referring to this election. This is in Rhode Island, when they had a candidate running for governor who was of Portuguese ancestry. Normally, you don't have that, so you can't do a comparison of, does it make a difference when you have somebody of Portuguese heritage who was running for office? So this is not a church. Club Juventude is a social organization in Rhode Island. And you can see across all the different elections, you compare them to the statewide turnout. And some cases here, they were actually below. Here, they were already above. And many of these other, generally, they were above the turnout. They were following the pattern that we saw where when Portuguese are registered, they do turn out and vote. But in this election, this particular election, this is where they have a candidate running for governor who was of Portuguese ancestry. And if the name serves me, if my memory doesn't fail me, I believe his name was Pires, or as they say in Rhode Island, Pires. Always bothers me how they pronounce names back east, but we'll get in the, you guys can send me the hate mail later. Anyway, you can see here, because there was a Portuguese candidate, look at the difference in the election between the statewide and the Portuguese community. That is a huge difference. And so maybe, it would increase our voter turnout if we had more Portuguese-Americans running for political office. And I know Denise made a very good point that, in the Valley, we have here in the Valley of California, we have a lot of Portuguese-Americans running for different offices, everything from mayors to county board of supervisors, even to obviously congressional office. And so, this may have a factor in, maybe a factor in our voter turnout. In other places, they have not had that advantage in the past, but it really has an effect as well. So, once we knew we had numbers to prove it, we wanted to change the mindset. And the mindset really had to even start with ourselves. We had to stop saying stuff that was not true about us. And if we're going to convince other people that we are a political force, we needed to do that. And I love this quote. This is from Margaret Mead, if you know, the anthropologist, because her quote is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world." I think the Proud Boys were attempting to do that in the wrong way, but that's a different comment. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And you know, the thing is, we found that if you have in an organization a committed group of people, and we all know, all of us who volunteered in Portuguese organizations, we know that the committed group is a handful. You know, it usually you can count them in both hands, but that committed group can make a difference. And we saw that in organizations. We also know that winners see what they want, and losers see what they don't want. And so what we needed to do is really focus people on believing that we are a significant political force, and then using that force and using that data to convince elected officials that they had to address the needs of the Portuguese community. And this varied from place to place. As Dulce pointed out, in California, I think people are more integrated economically. They're a little bit better, and the needs directly related to Portuguese are not as much so as when you have communities in the East Coast where they are heavily concentrated of Portuguese immigrants, and in some cases, whether educational or city elections, they need, or even I know in Massachusetts, one of the things that the community really wanted to deal with, and particularly in the Fall River area, was the prosecutor in the county who was looking for every excuse to repatriate any Portuguese-American who committed any crime of any sort. And so they went out literally to get him out of office, and eventually succeeded in doing that, you know. So we had to kind of change the approach. And we all know that you can't keep doing the same old thing and expect to get different consequences, because it doesn't work. So what did these organizations end up doing? And they didn't all do every single thing, but a majority of them engaged in the majority of the things that you see here. Obviously, I showed you earlier that even though a majority of Portuguese were already citizens, there were significant numbers that were not. And so many of them started to make campaigns to make sure that those who were not became citizens. And of course, with that came the need to offer them classes and other things so they could pass the test. In California, I know Jim McGlinchey and I kind of went around on this. He thought that people were more likely to vote if they had to go to a polling station, to a precinct to vote. I always felt that absentee voting was the way to go. And in California, we had that opportunity all along, and now it's automatic. They mail everyone the ballot. But I made sure, and I ran several campaigns here in the Turlock area to get people to sign up for absentee balloting, because they could vote at home. And particularly for older people who are not all that literate or may not read English very well and weren't quite sure, voting at home allowed them the opportunity to have a child, a grandchild, somebody sit down with them and help them fill out the form and put it in the mail. And it was really an easy thing to do. Other things that were done with voter information workshops, trying to talk about the issues, the different things that they'd be voting on, explaining things. And then something that credit has to go to Santa Clara, candidates forums. Santa Clara started this, and I mean Santa Clara in California, and then we took it to the East Coast and other places, but really starting to do our own thing that other organizations do, inviting candidates to a night and giving them a set of questions and having them answer the question. I mean, literally, the set of questions were usually 4 questions. And because you couldn't, you know, by the time you go through all the candidates and they all answer 4 questions, and we all know how politicians like to talk. So, you know, we couldn't make it a very long event. They would usually take about an hour, hour and a half, and that's about as long as people can do it. But it had a 2-sided effect. One, it again brought the Portuguese people in direct contact with people running for office, and it brought them to a Portuguese hall, a Portuguese place where they were comfortable going to. And from the other side, for the candidates, it made them aware that, hey, there's an organized community here. They're really doing something to turn out the vote. You know, I better pay attention, because there's one thing I've learned about elected officials. You know, they when they see votes, they will make sure they pay attention to those votes. We got a lot of priests and other elected officials to write letters that we were then sent to people in explaining this whole thing of what was going on, why voting is so important. A lot of the priests made an issue of having a homily a week or 2 before election, not telling people how to vote, because we were always, and this is, I think, a very important point, the Portuguese-American Citizenship Project never told anyone how to vote. We never said vote for Democrat or vote for Republican. We never said vote for John and don't vote for Mary. We never said, you know, vote for Portuguese and don't vote for non-Portuguese. Our whole campaign was make sure you vote. How you vote is up to you, but make sure you vote. Make sure you go out, because it is important for our community that you turn out, that you vote, that you do these things. And so this is the card that I referred to earlier. This is just one example of a card that went out, and it basically, simple postcard. It was the cheapest thing to mail, was a postcard. And we would put the information here. You know, this is happens to be from a primary election. Because some of our places span 2 counties, we listed information if they weren't sure if they were registered or needed to do that. And we did this many different ways. We ended up, one example is in Merced County, in the city of Hilmar, which has a very, very large concentration, a large proportion of Portuguese people living there. Through the Casa dos Açores, they agreed, and they basically had us pull out of the voter list, not only their membership, but pull out everyone who was of Portuguese ancestry. And instead of mailing these only to the members of Casa dos Açores, they mailed it to everyone who lived in that jurisdiction who was of Portuguese background. And that was their community service. They wanted to get voter turnout in the Portuguese community in all of Hilmar, and did it very successfully. And so you can see that we were sending a significant number of cards. Now, an interesting thing that happened is a lot of particularly in churches, they wanted to send it not only to people who we knew were registered voters, but they wanted to send it to everyone who was on their list of members, because 1, they didn't want to single people out, and 2, they had the impression, or they thought that if they sent it out to everybody, it would encourage other people to register to vote and to become voters. And I referred to earlier the Sacred Heart Church, and you can see how many families. I mean, we were sending out 4,184. That's a lot of cards. I remember taking boxfuls of cards to the post office, sorted by zip code, obviously, to make sure, you know, we got them out. So this is, I don't have a video to show you of a candidates forum, nor do I think you would like to sit and watch an hour of candidates talk about what they would do for you if you got elected them. But this is just an article from the Portuguese Tribune newspaper, just focusing in on the candidates forum. And I think the picture in the middle is the one that's really the one that gives 1,000 words, because it shows that there's a very good, from an election year, if you've gone to any of these forums and you look at how many people show up and you see the chairs that are there, you see that that is a significant turnout. And so for a candidate running for office, like, wow, you know, I've got 150 people in the audience. It's the biggest audience I've talked to, especially for these smaller elections. Obviously, people running for president and governor are used to speaking to much larger numbers. People running for a county board of supervisor or a city position or a school board position, this was a significant, and that picture on the bottom left is also just shows you the candidates. I mean, this is Santa Clara, I think, did a very classy, very well done. And then when it was all done, there was kind of a meet and greet. So there was a reception, some snacks, finger foods. Candidates could mingle with the crowd could ask candidates questions individually. And so it was a very, very well done event. Like I said, it became replicated in other places. All right, so one more myth that I want to talk about. And one of the myths was that, you know, the voter, you know, first, let's go back to the other ones. The myth was, well, they're not citizens, they are not registered, they don't vote. You know, but the fourth myth was, well, the younger people, they were born here, they were raised here, they vote. You know, this is an old folks problem. It is not a young folks problem. And what we found is actually quite the opposite. What we found, and this is taken by age group, and I don't know why in mine, I don't know if you guys see, but mine, I don't see the bottom where it shows the age groups. Do you see, Denise, in the bottom of the slide, the age groups?
It does, yeah. 30,
Okay,
40, yeah, it does.
Because I'm a presenter, I see the Zoom strip
Right
there.
So it goes from below 30 to all the way
Yes.
to plus 70.
Exactly. So what you see in the left are younger folks, and you keep going across the ages, and what you see in the far right are the people 70 and above. And what you see is that Portuguese-Americans are exactly the same as Americans in general. Many people don't realize that young people turn out in abysmal numbers. They are not voters. And you can see here on the very far left, people up to age 30. So you can register at 18 up to 30. In the Portuguese community, 40% turned out. If you go to the 65, which is the next to last, the 60s people, they were almost 90%, 80+% turnout. They turn out in much larger numbers. And this happens to be Denise's playground, Tulare, but you can see that the Portuguese-American numbers pretty much parallel, pretty much mirror the numbers for all voters in Tulare City, with the one distinction that I've said earlier: when the Portuguese are registered to vote, they tend to vote in higher percentages than everyone in general. And you see that here, and I'll show you some more slides that you can see. This one, I forget now. Oh, Spirit Sun Church in Massachusetts. And again, you see the very same pattern. You see that people up to age 30, under 30, abysmal, less than 20% turnout. Where you get into the 60s here, and you've got over 70%, and then it tails off a little bit as you get to the more senior type of thing. And again, here it's even more pronounced, the difference between the Portuguese community and the non-Portuguese, the general voting public in that area of Massachusetts. And a significant difference actually between the Portuguese turnout. I mean, go back here, non-Portuguese had a 10% turnout. Portuguese at least had like an 18%, abysmal, but it was there. Just another one, Hilmar. This is again showing you the comparison between being registered and actually turning out by age group. And you see that even though the young folks, the under 30, They are registered. There's more of them registered than any other age group. Their turnout is not very good at all. And as you progress up the ages, you can see the most senior, there's less of them. This is not percentages, but actual numbers. But out of the, even though there's less, they vote at a higher number than the young crowd, and you can see in between. Just a couple of more here, Fall River, couple of different churches, registered voter turnout. And again, you can see that, you know, there is a higher turnout in the Portuguese community. Okay, so let me just jump ahead here because I'm looking at the clock and I see that I only have a few more minutes left. So going forward, what do I think we need to do? Obviously, this is, I love this Dutch proverb because I think it speaks so much of our political class. No one speaks the truth to them. I think if you've been listening to the January 6th inquiry, some powerful men don't want to hear the truth, you know, but the problem is many times people don't have the courage to speak the truth to powerful men. They tell them what they think they want to hear. And so our elected officials need to know that we have a significant number of voters, that we vote at a higher percentage than the general population, and that in many of the smaller elections, not the presidential election, not the gubernatorial election in California, we're not the ones that are going to swing that. But in many cities in California, in many counties in California, we have enough votes that we can make a significant difference on who gets elected to office. We might actually, in many cases, be able to be the determining factor on who gets elected. And so I like to have quotes from all sorts of different things. St. Francis de Sales, who said, pray if everything depends on God, but work as if everything depends on you. And I think, again, with a small group of committed people, it is amazing how you could change things in your community. And we have to remember that it is, you know, for us to do it. It's not going to be done for us. We can't expect somebody else. We have to work for it. And that's where the California Portuguese-American Coalition, it's where the Portuguese-American Citizenship Project before did their work. And so, and we have to remember, and I think this is I think in a sense, the sad thing is with the passing of the Portuguese-American Citizenship Project is that it was, you know, the marathon's not over. The race is not over. There's a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of work to do, particularly amongst the younger generation. It is not the older generation. That the older generation, once they're citizens, they registered in higher numbers. Once they're registered, they vote in very high numbers. But the younger crowd are the ones that we need to work with. There's a story that I think to me is very suiting, and you may have heard this story, the story of the old donkey. But there was a farmer, and this is so appropriate for where I live in California because agriculture is the main thing. But there was a farmer who put the donkey out in the pasture, and the donkey didn't realize it, and that walking through the pasture and munching on the grass, and he didn't even realize because the grass had overgrown all this, but there was a well, uncapped well, and the donkey fell into the well. And when the donkey fell in there, he gave out this terrible scream, and the farmer heard and went out there and realized that the donkey had fallen down deep in the well. So he went to get a couple of his neighbors, and they came and they took some ropes and they tried to pull the donkey off the well. But as much as they tried, they could not get the donkey out. And so the farmer thought, well, I can't just let the poor guy in there and starve to death. And he thought, well, I should have closed off this well years ago. This would not have happened. And, you know, the donkey's already old. He can't do any work anymore. So let's just call this his funeral, and they got some shovels and they start throwing dirt into the well. And as they threw dirt into the well, the donkey would let out this terrible scream because the donkey realized he was getting buried alive inside the well. But after a while, they kept shoveling the dirt. After a while, the donkey stopped screaming. He's not making any sound. And they keep shoving, still no sound. So the farmer decides to go look. And what he saw was telling him, because as another shovel full of dirt came in, the donkey would shake it off, he would stomp on it and rise a little bit higher. And the next shovel dirt came, he would shake it off, stomp on it, and rise a little bit harder. And the donkey realized that sooner or later, he was gonna have enough dirt to get himself out of the well. Well, it's a story, the moral for us here is that we may think, oh God, they're throwing all this junk on us. They're people that they don't listen to us, they don't. No, shake it off, folks. Stomp on it and rise above it. And I think we as a community can do so much. So that I think is my 40 minutes, Denise, actually a little bit over. So I went like 45, so I apologize, but that's where I'm gonna stop.
Thank you, Elmano. If you want to stop sharing, thank you. Thank you so much. You have time. If you continue going, we have a little bit more time. But there are a couple of questions, and then those in the audience here. And I'll try on social media. It's really hard to get questions from there, as we are in so many different groups. But other than the comments that have been coming in, and people are enjoying it, we appreciate that. But there was actually there is one comment from Dr. Dulce Maria Soares Scott, who was with us before, Elmano, and she was saying that she was referring to State Treasurer Paul Tavares.
Oh, she was, okay.
He's an icon, I think, still today in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island. And there was just a comment, a kind of question comment in the Q&A from poet Millicent Borges-Accardi, and she was saying if we think, of course, migration numbers are much lower, and they are, and she's talking to a few Portuguese-American immigrants that she's met, and lots of them are from Lisbon and Porto, rather than the islands. So is there less immigrant from the islands? I think that maybe the folks that you're talking to, Millicent, that are more involved in the arts might be from, but I don't think there's any significant, I don't know if Elmano knows this and wants to comment as well, but I don't think there's any significant immigration from anywhere in Portugal coming to California. Now to the East Coast, there's still a few numbers up there to New Jersey especially, but to California, I don't think it's significant.
Actually, I would say it's not significant, but most of the recent immigrants that I run into nowadays are in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they are highly educated, usually working in the tech field, but they're not a huge number. It's a small number. From the Azores, I've seen a few here in our area. Typically, though, they are children who were, well, they are adults now, but they were here as children, born here. Their parents went back to live in the Azores. They married, have their own families, and decided to come back. But again, they are not a significant number. It's a very small percentage of all the people that are here.
Yeah, indeed. And we here in the southern part of the valley, and I think maybe a little bit in your area as well, we had a little bit, and it wasn't an avalanche. It wasn't like, 1960s or 70s, or even beginning of the 80s, but we did have a significant rise in numbers, compared to the other years in 2007, 2008, and this has been, now 14 years ago, because of the economic crisis in the Azores and worldwide. But most of those were clandestinely. Most of those were what we call illegal immigrants here to this part of the valley and to Southern California in the Artesia area. They came, as when a visiting visa and stayed here. And actually, if we all recall, those of you in the Portuguese-American community, there was a little bit of a, at one time, we thought that our special status of not requiring a visa might end because quite a few Portuguese citizens had come over on a visiting, with your passports and overstayed, by, some of them are still here and some of them are now, in the system. But that was, again, low numbers here. And I think the same thing in the Northern Valley.
Yeah, I would agree. There was that little blip, if you will, in numbers, and that was a result of the economic crisis. And I think, I get emails from I forget the exact name, but the Center for Immigration Studies or something in Lisbon. And every once in a while they have a report on how many Portuguese went to this country or that country. And I think immigration from Portugal as a whole period is so low. I mean, it's the biggest countries they're talking about. Well, 2,000 people went to Luxembourg or Switzerland or some. It's not a significant number, and it definitely is not here. And what I would say, almost what is becoming a significant number is the other way around. How many people are moving to Portugal? There was actually, many of you may have seen an article in the Los Angeles Times of how many Californians have taken a permanent residence in Portugal and what they're doing to prices in Lisbon for apartments and stuff like that. You know, they're driving up prices. But I know in the Azores as well, in fact, we have a couple that are friends that she is not Portuguese, he is, and they went there to visit and they loved it, and they have now sold their house. They actually departed about a week ago, and they're going to live in Praia da Vitória, in your backyard, Denise.
It's a good place to live.
Yeah. So, and there are many more. I mean, that's one
indeed.
example, but there are many, many more.
Indeed, indeed. One question, comment I'd like to get from you, or question to you, and get your thoughts on it as well. When the presentation by Dulce, we were talking about how there's different levels of integration. You she has an impressive number of charts that, like I said, and she has volunteered to give those, for us, through CPAC and other organizations and the universities and everything, PBBI, the Center for Portuguese Studies at Stanislaus, to use these in collaboration and look at all of the work that she's done. And so she was talking about integration in urban settings, of course, and immigration in the valley, to where, for example, one of the things that I encountered when I came to Tulare, and I didn't even think about it, I was 10 years old, but when I was, a teenager, 12, 14, 15, was that I was impressed when I would talk to people whose parents had immigrated. They were born here, and sometimes their parents had immigrated as children, but they spoke such good Portuguese. And then I would go see my cousins who lived in Chino, and they themselves had immigrated when they were 1 or 2, and they spoke, bad Portuguese, quote unquote. They didn't speak Portuguese well, and yet these people were born here and their parents had come. And it was because basically they lived on a farm, and everybody spoke Portuguese, and they really spoke English very little, only when they went to school. But my question, and get your thoughts on, is that of the 140 that we've identified, the California Portuguese-American Coalition has identified as being of Portuguese background, and there are more, we know that, in public office, the great majority, it's not like by, it's by big numbers, are in the San Joaquin Valley, or basically from Sacramento to Bakersfield, and then a few of them in those northern rural counties above Sacramento. Very few anymore in the Bay Area of Portuguese background in public office. There's a few, but less and less, much less than there were, in the 1990s. And in Sacramento, and in for example, in San Diego, there's not any Portuguese American that we know that are in elected office. In the Artesia Chino area, there's just a couple now. There used to be more. So what is your read and your experience when you were leading the Portuguese Citizenship Project, how we in the Valley have had these stronger numbers, besides always having someone in Congress in the last 30 years or plus, was starting with Tony Coelho. But other than Congress, even in local offices, what do you attribute to that?
That was not the focus of the Citizenship Project. So anything I say is strictly an opinion, and not anything that we have any research to back it up. But it's something that I've thought about, and I've wondered why. And I think in part has to go back to economics and where you sit in the economic scale, if you will. And the fact is, we know that in this valley, the Portuguese, because it is an agricultural-based economy, the Portuguese play a very significant role in the economy. The second largest employer in Merced County is a Portuguese business. It's A.V. Thomas Produce, the sweet potato business, second largest employer in the county. So when you have economic power, you many times want to transfer that into political power because you know your business depends a lot on the decisions made by elected officials. And so I know that as a consequence, people get involved in part because they also feel more empowered. And so they feel like it's not above them to run for office and win office and get elected. And they do, you know, whereas when you go to a San Jose, for example, you know, you may have a Portuguese business and have a significant business, but when you compare that to the kind of businesses that are in Santa Clara County, where you have these tech businesses with thousands of employees, you know, and then everything, it's much harder to gain power than it is in Merced County, where you have, you know, a few 100,000, you know, probably a couple of 100,000 people in the whole county, you know, and so you can transfer that. So that's an opinion. I don't know if there's any validity to it or not, but it's a thought that I've had and that I think is the case, but who knows?
Do you think that a little bit has to do, there are a couple of kind of what we might call it outliers or not so, which is, for example, as you mentioned, Merced County, 5 supervisors, 3 of them are Portuguese. Kings County, 5 supervisors, 3 of them are Portuguese. Fresno County, which there's not a very strong Portuguese-American population in Fresno County. In some of the rural areas there are, but not in Fresno itself. But Fresno County, 5 supervisors again, 2 of them are Portuguese. Do you think that some of this, and we look at Congressman Costa, for example, as one example, but there are others, you know, Congressman Valadão, they are able to, both Costa and Valadão are able to build bridges, very strong bridges with other ethnicities, the Armenian community, the Hispanic community, other communities as well. Do you think that some of this situation that happens with these counties where we are certainly don't have that much population? I mean, Merced County has a good Portuguese population, but not enough to justify 3 Portuguese-Americans, the majority, and Kings County the same, and Fresno with 2. Do you think it's kind of a product of integration that their parents were able to integrate and they themselves have been able to integrate and build bridges with other communities? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I would agree with you, Denise. I think it has to be. I mean, the fact is, you cannot be an outlier. In Merced County, last that I looked, and I haven't looked for a while, but the last that I looked, Portuguese-Americans were 6% of the population.
They are. I just looked actually last night. It's about 6.5%. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're still about 6.5% because they've had some people probably obviously have left Merced County, but Merced County has also gotten influx from people from LA and other areas that are now buying homes there.
Yeah. And so 6% doesn't earn you anything. I mean, let's be real, you know, and without creating coalitions, you are not going to get elected. So it's, you know, the mindset in California has to be different than the mindset, for example, in southeastern Massachusetts, where Portuguese communities are a very large percentage of the population. But that's not true in California, nowhere in California. And I would say in our area, we probably have now one of the largest percentages. It's still not enough for us to say, okay, we're going to, you know, be the Irish of Boston and we're going to run the city. No, we're not. So without creating these coalitions, and in California, the coalition has to be with the Latino community as one, because they are such a significant proportion of the population nowadays, and a growing population. I think, you know, we look at some of the districts in the Valley that have been historically represented by Portuguese, you know, they're becoming predominantly Hispanic or districts. And so, you know, that creates a different coalition. It's why I think, I remember Dennis Cardozo when he was in Congress, he belonged to the Hispanic caucus, you know, and I believe Costa does as well. And you have to, if you don't, you might as well retire and go home, because you're not going to be able to get elected. And, you know, if you're in Fresno, you have to probably network with the Armenian community and other communities as well.
And yeah, indeed. And one word I know that had nothing. That wasn't the focus of the Portuguese Citizenship Project. It is kind of the focus of and part of the California Portuguese-American Coalition. But sometimes folks think things that, or they think that maybe we should. I'm going to run for Congress, but we have two right now from the Valley and Portuguese-Americans in Congress, but we have another 138 in public office and school boards and water boards that I know the East Coast doesn't understand, but it's a commodity in California. Your thoughts on getting more and more Portuguese Americans and our eternal struggle, let me put it that way, for lack of a better word, our eternal struggle of getting more and more Portuguese taught in Californian high schools, California elementaries, where that's a possibility, but it only exists in one place, and that's Hilmar. But in California high schools, do you think that there's any correlation that a lot of these schools that actually do have Portuguese in the Valley, they have a member or two that's Portuguese on the board?
Yeah, although I will say the city of Ceres,
that's right,
is an exception to the rule.
Mm-hmm.
But what does Ceres have? A superintendent who's Portuguese background, and so she really wanted to get Portuguese taught, and both high schools offer Portuguese. But there is, I think, where we as a community can have influence are in the local. It's school boards, it's city councils, it's water boards. It's look at Turlock Irrigation District. I don't know if you have the numbers with you, but last time I looked, I think 4 out of the 5 are Portuguese background.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said earlier, people in the East Coast don't understand the importance of water districts. In California, water is more important than gold and oil, I think. We kill over it. So we, that's where you can have an influence. And if you get people elected to the school boards, you then have a natural connection when it comes time, particularly if you don't have the administrators in that district who understand the importance of Portuguese and who are themselves pushing to have Portuguese taught. Because while we can give the examples of the cities where Portuguese is taught, the school districts, there are many others that have significant Portuguese populations, yet do not offer Portuguese. I think, another example of the importance of administrators is Turlock, where Dana Trevathan is the superintendent. The name tells you, well, she's, who is she? And she's half Italian, actually, but the other half is Portuguese. And when she became superintendent, she made sure that not only the high schools, but the junior high schools also offer Portuguese, So I think, that is where our efforts we'll see results, if you will, not in presidential, not in gubernatorial. Those are big fish. And yes, we should vote, we should participate, but we're not going to be the swing factor in those elections.
And one final thought from you, and we're going to end it. We're just about at the noon hour, and we want to thank everyone that's been following us. Of course, since 10 o'clock, we'll be back tomorrow with 2 more presentations. Tomorrow, we have 2 presentations that we'll be putting forth. And before I get the final thought here from Elmano, just wanted to share that with you a little bit. So we are going to be having tomorrow, this was Elmano, of course. Tomorrow we have Maggie Melu, who's a Portuguese-American attorney, and John Sarsfield, her husband, the dynamic duo. They'll be talking about voting rights acts and voting laws in California and how they have changed in the last couple of years as well. And then we have a one-on-one conversation with our own vice president of the California Portuguese-American Coalition, John Pedroso, who is now on the Merced College Board of Trustees in Merced City College, and talk a little bit about some of his, he's won some elections, he's lost some, and like anybody who gets involved. And so I believe that will be a fascinating conversation about some do's and don'ts. And so we want to invite you to come back tomorrow between 10 and 12 Pacific Daylight Time. And we want to thank, of course, those following us here and also on social media outlets. And also, of course, all of these are recorded. They'll be part of our Portuguese Oral History Project at Fresno State through our library and through the Fresno State PBBI YouTube channel as well. Thanks also to the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco, who has been patiently on the line with us, listening to the presentation. We appreciate that as well. Elmano, a little bit maybe not in party politics, because we don't do that at California Portuguese-American Coalition, although we all have our parties. There are 11 people on the board, and they all have their preferences, and that's the way life should be. But one of the issues that I've seen, and from this last, and this is just very, very kind of information that was just gathered in the last couple of days as I was doing some digging on some things. We had actually quite a few people, let's not generalize it, let's not put a number on it because I don't have the exact number, that ran Portuguese-Americans throughout the valley, but a few of these lost, and basically because they're running now in districts that are no longer Republican, they're Democrat. And that can happen the other way around. Also, it can also happen. But in California, the numbers are what they are. You know, there's right now, I believe only 22% of Californians are registered in the Republican Party and over 60 in the Democratic Party. Is it worth it? Does the community need to look at the party structure itself, whether it's Republican or Democrat, and analyze this? And if you're going to run in a particular district that is like, 60% one way and 40% another way, it's pretty obvious that you might not win if you are of the party of the other party. And that happened here. That happened when Devin Nunes was our congressman, and we had at that time, before redistricting, a very heavy Republican district. So any Democrat that if he was Portuguese, he was going to run, he was going to lose. And that's happened also, as you know, a couple of times where we haven't had many of them, but Portuguese running against Portuguese, Costa against Teixeira. And now Valadão actually ran with someone from his own party, Medeiros, that ran against him. Valadão did win the primary. But what are your thoughts on that? Do folks need to look also at where they're at, and do we need to look at, hey, this is this party, this particular district leans this way, so if we want to get a Portuguese elected, maybe it should be a Democrat, or this district leans Republican. If we want to get a Portuguese elected, he may have to, or she may have to lean Republican. And this is not, saying one party over another. It's just being a little bit realistic about the California situation.
Well, it's interesting. I always look at political donations from big business, and even though some of them will skew one party or the other, a lot of them will contribute to both, because no matter who wins, they win, and that's what they want. The fact is, demographics are what they are, and not only California, but the nation, we're ahead, I think, of the nation of the demographic shift, but the nation as a whole is shifting tremendously. I think part of our political battles are people seeing that shift and having a hard time, accepting that it is indeed changing. And I think, Devin Nunes' old district is an interesting example, because somebody just ran to complete the term that he got elected, and he's elected for 1 year, I think.
Well, no, until November. There's the district has been split up in three.
And then the district changes tremendously, and whether that person even has a chance in the new whatever.
No, the district, Elmano, is going to disappear. So
Okay.
it's been carved up to Kevin McCarthy, Jim Costa, and David Valadão.
Oh, okay.
And that district no longer
So that the
exists.
person doesn't have much of a chance to.
Sure. Yeah,
to
he'd
get
have to. He
reelected.
would have to run against one of these incumbents,
Yeah.
So
The nice thing I think about California that other states I don't think have is, our districts are not as gerrymandered as they are in other parts. Ours are more gerrymandered, if you will, by the simple fact that the Valley, for example, is more conservative. If you're running in San Francisco, you better be not only liberal or progressive, but very progressive, and so what happens also, because our system is the top 2 vote getters in the primary
Mhm.
move on to the November, whether they are of the same party or not, doesn't matter. It's just the top 2 vote getters, kind of almost like a European system when you have presidential elections in Europe. And so if you're not leaning in the way that your voters are, you're not going to make it to the second round. Now, we have a real interesting case in California, which is, I think the district's down in Southern California, where it's a heavily Republican district, but they had several Republicans running and they all split the vote about equally. And they had 2 Democrats running, and the Democrats ended up getting more votes than the 4 Republicans. And it looks like now like the 2 Democrats will make it to the November ballot, even though the majority of voters in that district are Republican. Now, that's an anomaly. That's usually not the case. Usually, those 2 Democrats running in that district probably were doing it thinking there's no chance I'm going to get elected. And they might because of the split in the Republican primary vote, but indeed, we know that if you're going to win, I mean, California has now become such a heavily Democratic state. We have 2/3 of the state assembly, 2/3 of the state senate. Every statewide office is Democrat. And until, this is my opinion, but until the Republican Party tailors its message to the voters of California, they're going to continue to represent 25% of the voters, and that's all they're going to get.
Do you think that Portuguese Americans need to have a bigger voice within that the party systems, whether it be Republican or Democrat?
It's interesting because we have a young man here in our area who's on the county Democratic Party Central Committee, and we were talking about that, and indeed, I think that that's an opportunity for power and say, because the central committees do have a lot of influence in supporting people for when they run for office and giving them the professional help that they need and all that. And indeed, seeing him in that position, seeing the things that they do, I really have come to appreciate the importance of having more people. And I'm going to be nonpartisan here. I'm going to say, do whatever your party calling is, but I think get involved. That's the message.
Correct. Indeed. Whether it's with the system itself of the parties, whether it's nonpartisan, as most people who run for school boards and even in small cities, even in mayors or in city council, a lot of people don't identify with one party or another. We know what the party they are, but they don't. That's something different than in Portugal. Doesn't happen. Even the Junta de Freguesia of a freguesia with 175 people, you're either going to be of one party or another. But here we know that X, Y, and Z may be of this political persuasion, but he or she does not bring that upon himself or herself. Does not identify when they're running for small for school boards and other things. But those are some local and municipal elections, which are very, very important. Thank you, Elmano. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you all. Good day.
All right.